Hello, welcome, good evening. If you could take your seats, that would be great. We'll get started. Should remind myself to turn off my cell phone. This is our first live event in many months. So welcome. We are broadcasting live to live stream tonight's program. So my name is Michael Frederick. I'm the executive director of the Thoreau Society. The Thoreau Society is the largest and oldest organization devoted to an American author. We were founded in 1941. And we have members in 20 countries around the world, all 50 U.S. states, and the Penobscot Nation in Maine. So for this evening, we're hosting the Henry David Thoreau Prize for Literary Excellence in Nature Writing, also known as the Thoreau Prize, which was founded in 2010 by Dale Peterson, who's with us this evening. In 2020, the Thoreau Society began stewardship of the prize, and we're very grateful to have this honor, and thank you to Dale and the Thoreau Prize Committee for making that possible. So in the spirit of the prize really goes to Thoreau's writings, and particularly his essay on walking, where Thoreau declared, "I wish to speak a word for nature, for absolute freedom and wildness, as contrasted with a freedom and culture merely civil, to regard man as an inhabitant or part and parcel of nature rather than a member of society." And the Thoreau Prize is a literary award that is granted annually, as you'll see in your program book. We'll get on with it, and I'll introduce Thoreau Society President and Susan Fenimore Cooper Scholar, Rochelle Johnson.
Good evening and welcome to both our live in-person audience, so good to see you, and to our Zoom audience as well. Thanks for being here. The Thoreau Society is grateful to have you all here with us celebrating the crucial role that nature writing plays in our world. We are so delighted to be honoring Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer in her extraordinary work. Following some opening remarks and then the presentation of the Thoreau Prize, Dr. Kimmerer will speak and read. We will then have a brief Q&A. We'll probably take 3 to 5 questions, and we'll ask folks with questions to come to the microphones on either side, but not touch them in these pandemic times, and keep some distance between yourselves. And we'll take a few questions, and we'll also be sure to check the Q&A function of Zoom. So if you're live streaming with us, please feel free to put your questions into the Q&A there. Dr. Kimmerer will also do a book signing downstairs, so please, if you're in person, join us for that, and there will be book sales available. Before turning to honoring our distinguished guests, though, I want to offer thanks to the people, many people, who make this event possible. Thanks to First Parish Church for housing us, and for all of the assistance with arrangements that we've received from the staff from the church. Thanks to China Lemire and Corinne Smith and Peter Alden, who greeted you at the back and who are coordinating the book signing that will occur afterwards downstairs. Thanks to Brent Rinaldi, who's in the second row here with a camera, and to Richard Higgins, who's in the second row here, also with a camera. They are photographing and documenting tonight's event, so you'll see them moving around a bit. I also want to thank the Thoreau Society's indefatigable executive director, Michael Frederick, for organizing tonight's event and all things Thoreauviana all year. I want to thank the members of the Thoreau Prize Committee as well, many of whom are with us tonight, and the individuals who hosted Dr. Kimmerer today on our brief tour of Concord following a delightful walk around Walden Pond this morning. Thanks to Allison Goodwin, Jennifer Johnson, Rebecca Migdal, and Anna Kelklin, who are all up here from Gaining Ground, a nonprofit, volunteer-based organic farm that donates its produce to area meal programs and food pantries. Thanks to Dr. Maria Madison for a wonderful tour of the Robbins House, an early 19th century home originally inhabited by the first generation of descendants of a formerly enslaved African-American Revolutionary War veteran, Caesar Robbins. The Robbins House aims to stimulate dialogue about race and help foster a spirit of reconciliation and healing. It has done essential work in Concord and beyond. I want also to formally recognize again Dale Peterson, the founder of the Thoreau Prize. We're just so fortunate to have him here with us and to have had his leadership these many years. Thank you, Dale. Last, I want to thank and welcome to the stage Dr. John Cusick, Thoreau Society board member and scholar whose research and writing focus on Thoreau's interest in the Penobscot Nation. Dr. Cusick will say a few words in acknowledgement of where we are tonight, these lands on which we stand and sit, or zoom in.
Thank you, Rochelle. Thank you, everyone who's made this evening possible. It's a great honor to welcome Robin Wall Kimmerer to Concord, and as we do, it's important to acknowledge that we gather this evening on the historic lands of the Musquetequid people, a community with strong ties to the Nipmuc, Massachusetts, and Pawtucket nations. We thank them for their generations of stewardship of these lands and waters, and we acknowledge the history of colonialism that forced them from their homeland centuries ago and continues to disrupt Native communities across our country today. We hope this evening offers an opportunity to learn from the indigenous wisdom that still knits this world together and to begin to build a more just and sustainable relationship with all the members of our human and more than human community. Thank you, Rochelle. Thank you, Robin.
Thanks, John. The Henry David Thoreau Prize for Excellence in Nature Writing is awarded to someone who embodies the spirit of Thoreau as a gifted writer, an insightful naturalist, and ethical thinker. In his essay, titled Walking, Thoreau famously wrote, and I'll read these words again, "I wish to speak a word for nature, for absolute freedom and wildness, as contrasted with a freedom in culture merely civil. To regard man as an inhabitant or a part and parcel of nature rather than a member of society." Robin Wall Kimmerer's life work is similarly dedicated to regarding human beings as inhabitants, part and parcel of nature. Through her example, she encourages us to, in her words, pledge reciprocity with the living world. Dr. Kimmerer describes herself as a mother, a scientist, professor, and enrolled member of the citizen Potawatomi Nation. A forest ecologist, advocate for the rights, languages, and lands of Native American peoples. Of course, a celebrated writer. She is SUNY Distinguished Teaching Professor of Environmental Biology and the founder and director of the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment at State University of New York's College of Environmental Science and Forestry in Syracuse. Dr. Kimmerer publishes essays, scientific articles, and statements of activism. In 2003, she published her first book, Gathering Moss, A Natural and Cultural History of Mosses. That book won the 2005 John Burroughs Medal for Natural History Writing. In 2013, she published Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. Readers noticed this remarkable book right away. It received the 2014 Sigurd F. Olson Nature Writing Award. Teachers of environmental literature grasped onto it, sharing it with their students, with friends, with book groups. Others found their way to it as well. And then Braiding Sweetgrass began to perform its ongoing work quietly, much like the bean seeds described in its pages. On February 9th, 2020, 7 years after its initial publication, the book suddenly appeared on the New York Times bestsellers list. It has since remained there for 79 weeks and counting. Not many books published in 2013 make their way to national book list recommendations in 2020, but Braiding Sweetgrass did. It was recommended on summer book lists, holiday buying book lists. Best's collections of essays include its pages. It's also a Washington Post bestseller, a Los Angeles Times bestseller. The publisher of Braiding Sweetgrass, Milkweed Press, reports that the book has reached more than 350,000 readers. I'm willing to bet that number is far higher than sales can account for. Perhaps like your copy, mine is tattered and worn from being passed around. I'm no longer surprised when near strangers mention it, as they do to me nearly weekly. 5 days ago, a resident at my father's retirement community, who's tuning in tonight, hi Bob, held it up as I walked by him reading on the patio, asking me if I'd heard of it. He had his daughter's copy. Last winter, I stood on a hilltop, taking a break from sledding with my daughter. A father, doing the same, chatted, told me he was a mechanical engineer, and asked, once he learned that I teach environmental literature, "Do you know this book I'm reading?" It was his sister's copy. The book gets around, it's gifted and re-gifted, and then shared again. As Elizabeth Egan recently wrote for the New York Times, timing, patience, and wisdom are the secrets to Robin Wall Kimmerer's success. In mentioning timing, Egan refers to the timeliness of Dr. Kimmerer's message, one increasingly crucial, even pressing, in our time of climate catastrophe. In mentioning patience, Egan suggests Dr. Kimmerer's patience in waiting for people to grasp the significant role that Indigenous wisdom must play at this moment. But the earth itself has also been patient, as so many people, particularly in this country, have resisted that the planet is in any peril at all. In mentioning wisdom, Egan refers to Dr. Kimmerer's gentle but firm coaxing of the larger culture toward practicing reciprocity and responsibility, gratitude, and humility. Robin Kimmerer reminds us of the need to simplify, to live more deliberately. In teaching readers how to dwell in gratitude for the earth and its abundant gifts, Robin's work is so wildly successful 7 years after its publication because we need it to transform our world. Still, it may seem a bit strange, odd, to honor Dr. Kimmerer with an award named for Thoreau, whom the public remembers as a misanthropic, single, childless, cranky hermit, wanting to escape his neighbors. In his essay, Walking, Thoreau went so far as to advise readers to be, quote, ready to leave father and mother and brother and sister and wife and child and friends and never see them again. In contrast, Dr. Kimmerer celebrates her devotion to her children, friends, students, her neighbors, including the Onondaga Nation, to her ancestors and her ancestral language. Whereas Thoreau's relation to Native American cultures was as a limited student only, his explorations steeped in a culture of racism and violence, taking him to the Maine woods alongside his Penobscot guides into the pages of books. Dr. Kimmerer's Native American ancestry informs who she is and how she understands herself in time, place, and story. Whereas Thoreau rejected an invitation to join an organization of scientists, Dr. Kimmerer is a card-carrying professional. She advocates a merging of scientific ways of knowing with those of traditional ecological knowledge and ethics to form, in her words, a polyculture of complementary knowledge. Whereas Thoreau is famous for practicing voluntary isolation, Dr. Kimmerer advocates again and again a culture of connection, urging us to embrace all the world's beings as kin. But there are also important connections between these two nature writers. Though Thoreau had no children of his own, he adored them, regularly leading them through the woods and on huckleberry parties, beckoning them with his flute, and then teaching them the trees. He was a formal teacher, too, until he was told that teaching must entail punishing his students. He may not have joined any scientific society, but his scientific practice was rooted in the spiritual as well as the material. And he knew the potential of a single pond to renew both self and culture. As Robin Wall Kimmerer writes of her own sustained engagement with a pond, transformation is not accomplished by tentative waiting at the edge. Both writers know what it is to chase the depths of a pond so that they might transform the world. In a recent lecture, when asked why she thinks her work grows more popular and relevant by the day, Robin Wall Kimmerer replied, "We are in a time of great remembering." She went on to explain that we are increasingly realizing the need to grapple with the past, with our human successes and our failures, with those portions of history with which we must reckon, as well as those we might celebrate. We must seek models of reciprocity and flourishing in place of those of consumption and depletion, also that we might rebuild the future. Thank you, Dr. Kimmerer, for reminding us of the great light of memory in a time when both the future and the past can loom dark. You have made your life's work the creation of, to borrow your words, a braid of stories meant to heal our relationship with the world. You inspire us with your writing, your mothering, your teaching, your activism, and your generous model of personhood. We are so pleased to award you the 2021 Henry David Thoreau Prize in Literary Nature Writing, along with a commemorative gift, an early edition of Thoreau's The Maine Woods. Congratulations.
Oh. Miigwech, thank you for the beautiful introduction and the insights that you offer. I'm deeply moved. To our audience here in person, you look beautiful out there. And to our Zoom audience, I'm so glad you're here too. And to all of you, I'd like to offer a traditional protocol greeting and say, Bonjour in denoe magunadok. Shabadaski gish kokwe nadeshnakas. Bodwe wad me kwenda. Megazedo dem, minwa makodo dem. Mi gwech kinegego, gami jung. I don't speak enough much really, of my Potawatomi language, but it is an endangered species, and so our teachers ask that we breathe life into it and share it as often as we can. And in my introduction, I said that I'm an Anishinaabe woman, a member of the Eagle Clan, also of the Bears, and that I'm an enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. It is also part of our traditional protocol to always begin with gratitude, for we are showered daily with the gifts of the earth. Simple things, like the wealth of having food to eat, sweet air to breathe, the preciousness of water, the companionship of clouds and geese on a fall day, gratitude for each other, for the privilege of our shared work, and for the original peoples in whose homelands we meet. Let us use this gratitude to offer our intention, that is, we give thanks for the earth, that we might live in such a way that the earth will be grateful for us. I also offer great gratitude to those who came before, who cleared the path that I might be with you here today. My parents, budding naturalists themselves, who connected me as a kid to the land. All 6 of us shared a single pair of binoculars to go bird watching, and they bought me my first wildflower book. They stitched together my first book, which was a little book of poems that I wrote when I was probably 8 years old. It wasn't very good, but it was a lovely job of putting it together. To my grandparents, especially my grandfather, who was a survivor of the Carlisle Indian School, whose language was taken away from him. And so to be able to speak even a word, to hear my grandchildren speak even a word, I am grateful for that resilience. These are people who are storytellers as well as story makers. Gratitude to the first so-called nature writers in the oral tradition, who gave us stories of the land that have been passed down since time immemorial, the enduring oral literature of indigenous storytellers, and I'll share a bit of that this evening. Gratitude to the writers, my literary heroes who created landmarks on this path that we celebrate together this evening. I am deeply honored to be in your company. And this evening, I offer you a bow of gratitude for this profound honor of being recognized with the Thoreau Prize. Every one of us in this room and on this planet stand in awe and gratitude for the gifts of his thought, his seeing, and his writing, that we might share what he saw. To be part of that lineage is humbling. And I was asked this evening to share both some readings and a reflection on what is the role of the nature writer. What is the role of the nature writer? I ask myself this all the time, and I don't have the answer, but I can share with you part of my answer. I could speak globally and abstractly about the role of the writer to celebrate the living world, to awaken attention, to inform, to extend our imagination, to incite wonder, to nurture ecological compassion, to sound the alarm, to challenge the forces that threaten life, to agitate in defense of the world that we cherish. All of these and more are the legitimate and worthy roles of the nature writer. But before talking about this at the abstract level, let me begin with the role not of the nature writer, but of this nature writer. You know me, and you just heard a lovely introduction to Robin Wall Kimmerer, which is my English name. But the person who walked the path that led to this moment, her name is Shabadaske Gish Kokwe. In our way, our names are a gift to us that carries a teaching as to what is our responsibility while we are here on Turtle Island. It's not a prescription or even directions. It is sort of a carrier, that the carrier of that name can learn its gifts and responsibilities that come with it. And my name in our language, Shabadaski Gij Kokwe, means the light shining through sky woman. It refers to those beams of light, those cords of radiance that stream through the clouds and touch the earth. What do those rays do? This nature writer asks. What is their work? To create beauty, to connect earth and sky, and most importantly, to illuminate a place on the surface of the earth. And that, I feel, is my role as a nature writer, to shine a light, to direct attention, to reveal the beauty, to hear the lessons, and illuminate them so that we all might see. That is my role, to use an expression I love in the English language that we offer each other from our infancy to elderhood. You know what that phrase is? Look. Look. That's the work of a nature writer. Let's look. And speaking of introductions and who it is that is standing here in this beautiful surroundings, in all honesty, I really need to amend the introduction that was given, because I'm really not who you think I am. I am standing before you as 1 billion microbial cells who are running my gut and therefore my brain. I am about 3,000 invertebrates on my surface, innumerable fungi, to say nothing of the fact that every one of my cells, and yours, has been colonized by a symbiotic prokaryote who took up residence as a mitochondrion millions of years ago and has been with us ever since. My bones are not me, but the minerals from the soil and from my groundwater. My muscles are full of carbon on short-term loan from corn. And the breath that oxygenates my blood and brain is the exhalation of trees. So thank you for the kind introduction from all of us. This walking community, who is named me, is replicated in principle all over the earth, far outside the me and the you of our own species. I had a cup of my favorite white pine tea, and that white pine doesn't stand alone either. Tea is inseparable from the mycorrhizal network, linking them to myriad others. The nitrifying bacteria nestled in the needles, the bark beetles, the nuthatch, the pine drops. The pine is no more an individual than I am. We are all part of the great green we. And I think this is the role of the nature writer, to see ourselves in the web of relationships, to know this with the intellect and to feel it with the spirit, that all flourishing is mutual. As a writer steeped in both the Western scientific tradition of natural history and ecological sciences, and indigenous philosophy, worldview, and indigenous science, the role of this nature writer is also to illuminate an entirely different worldview, an understanding of what it is to be human in relation to Shkakmikwe, to Mother Earth, to be informed by intelligences other than our own, by the aspen people, the pine people, the beaver, and the deer people. We say, look, in the belief that if we see, if we listen, we will learn, that we will recognize the greatest teachers, what they are telling us. My role as a nature writer is to introduce the student and the teacher. So I want to read just a little piece from Braiding Sweetgrass about the teachers. It should be them who tell the story, but they're quiet beings whose voices are hard to hear, especially in the wind. I've stood among them and listened. The loudest thing is my own heartbeat. But then, as you settle into the quiet, there's more. Corn leaves rustle with a signature sound, a papery conversation with each other and the breeze. And on a hot day in July, when the corn can grow 6 inches a day, there is a squeak of internodes expanding, stretching the stem toward the light. Leaves escape their sheaths with a drawn-out creak. And sometimes, when all is still, you can hear the sudden pop of ruptured pith when water-filled cells become too large and turgid for the confines of the stem. These are the sounds of being, but this is not the voice. The beans, I think, make a caressing sound, a tiny hiss as a soft-haired leader twines around the scabrous stem of corn. Surfaces vibrate delicately against each other. Tendrils throb as they cinch around a stem, but only a flea beetle standing nearby could hear it. But this is not the song of beans. I've laid among ripening pumpkins, and this is what I hear, a creaking as the parasol leaves rock back and forth, tethered by their tendrils. Wind lifts the edges of leaves and eases them back down again. Wouldn't a microphone hidden in the hollow of a swelling pumpkin reveal the pop of seeds filling and the rush of water filling succulent orange flesh? These are the sounds, but they are not the story. Plants tell their stories not by what they say, but by what they do. What if you were a teacher, a keeper of great knowledge, but had no voice to speak it and you had no pen to write it? What if you had no language at all, and yet there was something that you needed to say? Wouldn't you dance it? Wouldn't you act it out? Wouldn't you have to be your own message? Wouldn't your every movement tell the story? And in time you would become so eloquent that just to gaze upon you would reveal it all. After all, what is a sculpture? Just a piece of rock with topography hammered out and chiseled in. And yet that piece of rock can open your eyes and open your heart in a way that makes you different for having seen it. It brings its message without a word. Not everyone will grasp it, for the language of stone is difficult. Rocks mumble. Plants speak louder than stones in a way that every breathing thing can understand. Plants teach in the universal language of food. Years ago, a Cherokee woman pressed into my hand a small packet. It was a corn leaf, dry and folded into a pouch and tied with a bit of string. She smiled and warned, "Don't open till spring." And so the next May, I untied the packet, and there was the gift of 3 seeds. One is a golden triangle, a kernel of corn with a broadly dimpled top and narrowed to a hard white tip. The glossy bean is speckled brown, curved and sleek, its inner belly marked with a white eye, the hilum. It lingers like a polished stone between thumb and forefinger, but this is no stone. And there's the pumpkin seed, like an oval china dish, its edge crimped shut like a pie crust and bulging with filling. I hold in my hand the genius of indigenous agriculture, the 3 sisters. Together these plants, corn, beans, and squash, feed the people, feed the land, and feed our imaginations of how we might live. The role of the nature writer to say, look, to illuminate that precious gift we carry of attention. And I think about that wonderful quote, the Thoreau quote of, "I have the habit of attention to such excess that my senses get no rest, but suffer from a constant strain." I don't feel like I suffer from too much attention, but I know what he means, that feeling of being awash in all of the energy of the world. And the work of the nature writer is always connected to paying attention and sharing what we experience, which is especially important today when people in the developed world spend a tiny fraction of their lives outdoors. It's about paying attention to nature. In a world where I'm told that the average American school child can recognize over 100 different corporate logos and fewer than 10 plants, our attention has been hijacked. The work of the nature writer is to bring it back into focus. Mary Oliver said, "I don't know much about prayer, but I do know about paying attention." I want to read just a piece from an essay called "What Does the Earth Ask of Us About Attention?" What does the earth ask of us? In response to this question, I've heard from some that the earth asks us nothing, that there is no possible voice in a collection of ecological processes. But I think that just means we're not listening. How does she ask? She asks by modeling generosity in times of plenty, by reminding us of limits in times of scarcity. She asks us to learn through the consequences of our failures and through the examples of our more than human teachers, helping us imagine how we might live. But we have to listen. Every one of us is endowed with the singular gift of paying attention, that remarkable focused convergence of our senses, our intellect, and our feeling. It's so appropriate, isn't it, that we call it paying attention, because it is a near universal form of currency. It is valuable, and it incurs an expense on the part of the payer, for we all know too well, attention is a limited resource. What should be our responsibility to the generosity of the more than human world in a world that gives us maple syrup, spotted salamanders, and sandhill cranes? Shouldn't we at least be paying attention? Paying attention is an ongoing act of reciprocity. It is, for me, the gift that keeps on giving, in which attention generates wonder, which generates more attention and more joy. Paying attention to the more than human world doesn't lead only, though, to amazement. It leads to the acknowledgement of pain. When we are open and attentive, we see and feel equally the beauty and the wounds. We see the old growth, and we see the clear cut. We see the mountain, and we pay attention to the mine. Paying attention to the suffering sharpens our ability to respond, to be responsible. This, too, is a gift, for when we fall in love with the living world, we cannot be bystanders to its destruction. Attention becomes intention, which coalesces itself to action. Deep attention calls us inevitably into deep relationship, as information and energy are exchanged between the observer and the observed, and neither partner in the exchange can possibly be anonymous. They are known, they have names. There was a time not so long ago when to be human meant knowing the names of the beings with whom we cohabit the world. Knowing a name is the way we humans build relationship. It's a sign of respect to call a being by its name, isn't it? And a sign of disrespect to ignore it. We have enabled, through our lack of attention to the living world, a state of nameless anonymity, bringing human people to a condition of isolation and disconnection that eco-psychologists have called species loneliness. Species loneliness, this deep, unnamed sadness, is the cost of estrangement from the rest of creation, from the loss of relationship. Our Potawatomi stories tell us that long time ago, when Turtle Island was young, the people and all of the plants and animals spoke the same language and conversed freely with one another. But no more. As our dominance has grown, we have become isolated, more lonely on the planet, when we can no longer call our neighbors by their names. If we are to manifest the values in the Sky Woman story, we have to once again call each other by name. Knowing the names is a pathway to recognition of the world as gift. The world seems a whole lot less like a shopping bag full of commodities and more like a gift when you know the one who gives you the aspirin. Her name's Willow. She's the one who lives up by the pond. She's a neighbor to Maple, who offers you the gift of syrup on Sunday morning pancakes. When I was a young person, a kid still in school with pressed plants under my bed and spore prints on the bookshelf, I was an avid reader of old-time natural history. And among my favorite shelves at the library was John Burroughs and Thoreau. Taking a historical perspective, perhaps, there was a time when the work of a nature writer was to direct attention, celebrate, and interpret the natural world, and through literary natural history, which we are all embedded and grateful for. There was a time when nature writers were about sharing knowledge. But today, in the age of information overload, when information is right at our fingertips, I think we are beyond needing more information, more knowledge. It is wisdom that we need. On the precipice of climate catastrophe, in the age of the sixth extinction, in this time of peril, we know what to do, but we don't do it. What is the missing piece that has us virtually paralyzed while the world burns? As we experience the wounds to the natural world, we realize that it's not just the land that's broken, but our relationship to land that is broken. And the role of the nature writer today, I think, is as a healer, offering a kind of medicine for a broken relationship. In Potawatomi ways, we think about stories and speak of stories as living entities who remember, who inspire, who teach, who bind us all together. And some kinds of stories are understood as medicine for the earth. And in thinking about what is this medicine for species loneliness, for our paralysis, I turned to the Potawatomi language. And I look at our word for plant. We have no word that just simply means a green growing thing. Instead, we use the word mishkikin, which means medicine. All the plants are called medicine. They're called medicine for the land, for their relatives, and for us, because not all that medicine belongs to we human people. But even the word medicine isn't quite right, because when you take that word mishkikin apart in the language, the etymology of that word, mishkikin means the strength of the earth. The name for plants, the name for medicine, is the strength of the earth. And you know what? It's a verb. It's a verb that means he or she is healed by the strength of the earth. I see evidence of this healing force, mishkikin, everywhere I turn. In the annual greening, which is the breath of the earth, in wildflowers that rise from the ashes of a fire, in a salamander dragging its tender belly across the pavement toward the pond, a tern who flies 9,000 miles to lay her eggs, a dandelion pushing up through the sidewalk, the mother on chemotherapy, the force that wants to go on for the love of being alive. They are enlivened, they are healed by mishkikin, by the strength of the earth. In this epidemic of species loneliness, we are lonely for authentic engagement within our own species and this estrangement from the other beings on the planet. In a state of species loneliness, we do not recognize our kinship with the more than human world. How can we lean on them for comfort or benefit from their intelligence and their stories? And what's more, what I really wonder is, what if the species loneliness is reciprocated? What if those species are lonely for us, for our respect, for our attention, for our gratitude? What if they need our help? What if they are calling out to us and we remain silent? Species loneliness is, I think, a disease of human exceptionalism. The notion that our species alone stands alone at the top of this fictional biological hierarchy, the pinnacle of evolution, the chosen species, fundamentally different, superior to all others, and more deserving of the riches of the earth. But it's lonely at the top. What is the medicine? What is the healing tonic that banishes this induced amnesia that makes us forget our relatives? Stories can be a kind of medicine, one ingredient in the restorative tonic for forgetfulness. And as we consider this last 500 years, you could think of this time as the era of Homo industrialis, the age of dismembering ecosystems, communities, soils, watersheds, communities, peoples. The root word to dismember, to cut apart, to exclude, to isolate, so that what was once whole lies broken in pieces. As a result, humans in this moment feel ourselves to be outcasts, no longer members, no longer belonging. And so we find ourselves today in the age of the great remembering. Remembering stories, language, medicines, remembering what our ancestors brought us here for and what our descendants ask of us. Becoming members of the family of the more than human beings. But it is not enough to only remember. We're called not only to pick up what was left for us, but to create new stories, new medicines for this moment, so that we leave behind our own wisdom and tools for our descendants, just as the ancestors left for us. Reflecting on Thoreau's legacy and how it has endured, what is it that makes a story last for hundreds of years? As we think about storytelling and story making, celebrating the literature of nature writing, it's important to celebrate the oral tradition. And so I want to share with you a reading from the oral tradition. It feels as if we are living in mythic times when powerful forces hold us poised at the edge of a cliff with the potential for catastrophe or salvation hanging in the balance. Over and over, this story comes to my mind out of its great antiquity. This is a story that has lasted for thousands of years. It is both ancient and urgent. It's a story that invokes another kind of kinship, more than ecological, more than genetic history, a kinship of fates entwined. Worlds are transforming. Which way will we fall? This medicine story was shared with me by Haudenosaunee elder Tom Porter, sitting at his table at Ganajohalege when he pulled out a deerskin bag of peach stones, when he told me about the time when Sky Woman's grandsons, the twins, were in conflict over the future of the beautiful world. I asked him if I might share this teaching, and he kindly granted permission. This is part of the Haudenosaunee creation story and has elements which also appear in our Potawatomi tellings of the origins of the world. Now, perhaps you know the story of how Sky Woman fell to earth from her home in the sky world, how she was rescued in mid-air by the wild geese who set her to rest on the back of the snapping turtle, how the water beings brought up mud from the depths to make her a home on the back of the turtle, which she sowed with green and we today call Turtle Island. I don't have time for that whole saga, but perhaps you know also the Sky Woman did not come here alone. She was pregnant. She was pregnant with her daughter, Winona, the first child born on Turtle Island. And here we pick up the thread of Sky Woman's story. For when her daughter grew to womanhood and the west wind sought her out, she became pregnant with twin boys. Those two babies were known by the names of Flint and Sapling. And even in their mother's womb, those boys were in competition with each other. It was, after all, crowded in there, and Flint wanted to get free. Sapling counseled that he must bide his time, that there was a natural way by which they would come into the world. But Flint was impatient and angry with his confinement, and so, as his name implies, he decided to cut his way out of his mother's womb rather than wait. The result, of course, was the death of his mother, Winona. And so the two boys were orphaned and raised by their grandmother, Sky Woman, who did her best to guide them. The boys had the responsibility of shaping this new world on Turtle's back, and they went about it in very different ways, according to their natures. Sapling intended to make life good for the humans who were to follow, so he made delicious blackberry bushes for their consumption. Flint, however, came behind and put sharp thorns all over those bushes. Sapling knew that the rivers would become the highways for the people, so he was so thoughtful, he made the rivers run in both directions so that you never had to paddle upstream. But Flint came along and undid his handiwork, so we have to paddle home. We see their handiwork even in maple trees. Sapling gave the trees the gift of making sweet maple syrup that would run thick and brown right out of the trees. But Flint thought that is way too easy for the people, so he went to the river with buckets of water and poured them into the tops of the maples. So today, the sap flows thin and clear, and we have to work very hard to get syrup. You see the pattern. These boys are not characterized as the good and the evil twin, as you might imagine. That judgment is not made. They simply represent the opposing forces at work in the constantly changing life of the world, the forces of creation and destruction. The boys struggled between these forces. They competed, they wrestled, and they did and undid each other's handiwork until eventually it was decided that the decision between creation and destruction would be decided at last in a game. To decide the fate of the world, they decided to match their skills at what we know today as the peachstone game. The players use a set of so-called stones. They are often peach pits or plum stones, and one side of the seed has been painted white and the other side is blackened. And the player shakes the bowl and tosses those stones up into the air, and only if the stones all turn one way or the other as they fall into the bowl does someone win. And in this case, if the stones fell all one way or the other, the fate of life on earth would be decided. If all the stones came up black, Flint would prevail, and destruction would be loosed upon the beautiful world. Should they all fall white, then the world would continue under the generous hand of creation. They played, and they played without a winner. They tossed the seeds for hours, back and forth, back and forth. With every throw, two boys gambled with the future of the world. Would life continue as we know it, or would all be lost? It's such an ancient story, and yet could not feel more contemporary, as we are today gambling with the future of the earth. On and on they played, all night, until the glimmer of light at the eastern horizon warned them that time was almost up. They could make only one more throw as the pink of dawn colored their faces. The stones flew into the air for the last time and began to clatter one by one into the bowl. The first one came up black, and the next, and the next. All the stones were black until there was only a single seed still hanging in the air, tumbling and spinning on its way to the bowl to join the others. And all the other beings watched in terror as humans gambled with the continuity of life. At the moment when all life hung in the balance, it is said that all members of creation, the trees, the berries, the grasses, the birds, the four-legged, the many-legged, the no-legged, all drew in their breaths as the last stone tumbled, and together all of creation gave a mighty shout. Its force caused the human foolishness to be overruled, and the power of their voices turned that last stone over as it fell into the dish. The color of trillium blooming in the spring, of mother's milk, of moonlit snow, the color of a polar bear. I've tried to imagine that shout, the roars, the panting, the swishing of grasses, and in my imagination I feel rather than hear their voices, large and small, chirps, hoots, buzzes, howls, and flutters, scrapes, squeaks, leaf flutters, needle whispers, spine quivers, buds swelling, seeds bursting, roots pushing, spores popping, and the vibration of the membrane in the smallest microbe, all coalesced in a great wailing wind, so cohesive in strength and direction that it stops the stone, spins it around, holds it poised in midair, and sets it down, life side up. It was the mighty shout of creation that saved the beautiful world, and we are gambling again with the fate of the earth. The plants, the birds, the salamanders, the starfish are all trying to make that mighty shout, but we have weakened them to the point that their voices are threadbare and faint, a raspy whisper that can barely be heard above the roar of the bulldozers. At this time, all this time, they have stood for us, and we have paid them with betrayal, with silence, as destruction reigns. Now it's we humans who must give the mighty shout. What is the role of the nature writer? In this moment, when the future of the living world hangs in the balance, it is to join the mighty shout. Meet you, miigwech. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, so very much, Robin. Dr. Kimmerer has agreed to take a few questions. We're hoping that our online audience has entered some on the Q&A. And if you have a question, I invite you to come to one of the microphones and pose it.
Robin, you and Henry both share a love for plants. Henry did not write about invasive alien plants in his day. Since then, dozens of horticultural plants have escaped and are killing and replacing our native plants and the wildlife that depend upon them. Thoreau country today is being overrun by trees such as Norway maple, shrubs like glossy buckthorn, vines like oriental bittersweet, flowers like garlic mustard, etc., etc. What would you, Robin, or Henry have to say about this issue, which Henry did not give us any guidance upon?
I like to say that I have had a lot of time to think about this question while pulling garlic mustard in my trillium woods. There is no question that part of the threats to our native flora and fauna are invasive species. We know this. So I want to talk about something that we don't always think about. Within the indigenous worldview, we have some familiarity with invasive species. If we take seriously the notion that those plants have intelligence, if we take seriously that they are our relatives, our kinfolk, that they are here to give their gifts, just as every organism is here to give their gifts, that forces us away from the standard conservation biology knee-jerk reaction to if it's invasive, it's bad, and needs to be removed, right? When I think, we have invited those species here. We have invited them. I think about, oh gosh, at home for us, Phragmites. Do you have a lot of Phragmites here too? Invading your wetlands, right? As a lover of cattails, I'm concerned for sure about Phragmites. But why is Phragmites here? Because we have put so much nitrogen and phosphorus into the water that our native cattails can't take it up. Maybe those invasive species are here to do work. Maybe they have skills and gifts that our plants don't have because we have changed the world. Maybe they're here to help. Maybe they are here to offer us mishkikin, to offer us medicine. Did you know that one of the most important medicines for Lyme disease comes from an invasive species? Maybe they have come here with goodwill. I think that our role as people is to find a balance. When I'm pulling mustard in my trillium woods, it's not out of hate for garlic mustard. And I say, garlic mustard, you can have the ditches. It's all yours. But I'm going to draw a line here, and you can't come into the trillium woods. I'm not going to try to eradicate you. I'm not going to, poison the world with Roundup. I'm just going to say, there's a boundary here, and I am participating in keeping that balance. So the perspective that I would like to offer is that we think about this and take seriously why they are here, and are they doing work that our native species cannot. So that's a thought. Anything else? Yeah, come on up.
Thank you so much for tonight. My question is for the children. I wish we can replicate, I feel like we need to replicate the words of the writers of nature and your words to bring to the schools and to seep into the schools. And if you had a magic wand, or if you could orchestrate the way to speak to our children or to engage with our children so that they can walk in the woods like you walk in the woods, what would you say to that?
2 words. Go outside. That's the teacher. You have to be attentive, compassionate, and present in the world. And I think it's so interesting that we often talk about this in terms of our children, Because honestly, what 4-year-old do you know who isn't madly in love with the world? Right? And what do the children say about that butterfly over there? They say, oh, he's on the flower, or she's on the flower. And what do we say to them? We correct their grammar. And we say, it's on the flower, right? We rob nature of its animacy. My point is we teach children estrangement and isolation. I think they should teach us about what it is to be alive in the world.
Thank you again. I had a question sort of pertaining to what you were saying about the world in sort of like an era of isolation and sort of seeking a sense of belonging. And I was wondering, as you get to know your roots more and more, learning your native language and indigenous ways of thinking and being, do you ever experience the imposter syndrome? And if you do experience that at all, do you have a way of coping with it or shaking it off?
No, I don't feel a sense of imposter syndrome. There was a time when I was much younger when, because my family didn't grow up on the reservation, because I couldn't speak my language, I felt like an outsider, like I didn't belong, until I remembered that this was, I felt that individually, like I had gone wrong somewhere. But then when you become aware of your own history, when I asked my father, why don't you know our language? And he says, that was all taken from us at the boarding schools and through removal of our homelands by deliberate policies of the federal government. When you start to realize that these things were not left behind by accident, these were taken. These were taken by violence. And in that, realize that it is not any of us. You know what fraction of Native people speak their language? In my tribe, there are 9 fluent speakers. 9 fluent speakers. So I came to understand it's not my fault. Not my fault that I don't speak my language. It is my responsibility to speak my language as best I can. And I hold up those language warriors, those culture warriors who are doing everything in their power to bring these back from the shadows where they were cast. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I have a question from the live stream, from the Zoom audience, which we had about 105 extra folks who attended this evening.
Great.
So just wanted to share that.
Hi, Zoom audience.
One of the questions was, how can we, as persons, find the naturalist within each of us?
It's a wonderful question. I want to say again, paying attention. I want to say again, go outside, but that's not really all, right? You're outside, you're paying attention. How do you remember this sense? I think it has so much to do with opening all of our senses to what the natural world is telling us, is embracing us. And when I think about my own students, some of whom are environmental scientists, but don't feel kinship with, they know it as facts, they know it is outside of them. What I see as a transformation for them is the moment they eat something from the earth. When they pick a berry, when they chew a leaf, when they make some white pine tea, they're transformed. So it can't just be an intellectual exercise of learning the names of plants and knowing bird song. All of those things are wonderful gifts, but I think it also has to be internalized to recognize our interdependence. And we human people, back to education, we so privilege literacy of the written word. But what about the literacy of listening? Shouldn't we all be able to, again, identify trees with our eyes closed? Of course you can do that, or to know their voices, to know their smells. So the engagement of your whole being and being open. And the last thing I want to say about that is to not privilege authority. That, was this right? Is this the right way to do it? There's no wrong way to do it. And we're always searching for the right answer, right? But it's your answer. It's authentic engagement with being outside. So thank you for that.
Good evening. Thank you for being with us. In Braiding Sweetgrass, you describe your personal experience when you went to school and the questions that you asked and the responses that you received from the scientific community, as well as some of the research that you did with graduate students later on. You have found the synthesis between indigenous wisdom and scientific knowledge. And I'm wondering if you can give us your personal insight into that process. Can you describe that for us, how that happened for you?
Yes, thank you for asking that question, because of course the whole metaphor of braiding sweetgrass with indigenous knowledge, scientific knowledge, and the plant knowledge is an exploration of exactly that question of living with a foot in both of those worlds, if you will. But what I came to understand, and what not understand but remember, is there's not two worlds. There's one world. It's the earth beneath our feet. And that's where I find the common ground between indigenous knowledge and scientific knowledge. As a plant ecologist, when I do an experiment, what am I really doing? I'm interviewing the land. I'm saying, what is it like to be, you little Tetraphis pellucida moss? How do you live your life? I design an experiment that asks the moss that question and lets the moss answer it in moss language. And our indigenous ways of being, observing, are to say, listen to those plants, listen to what they will teach you. So to me, it's in that engagement with the living world in this open way that I find common ground. What I realize and recognize is that they're expressed in two very different languages, right? One of them in the language of numbers, with the assumptions that the world is just made up of stuff, of biophysical entities that we could learn about. But in the indigenous framework, we are asking the question if I could learn from, not about, but I could learn from the land. And so there's those two different perspectives, but the knowledge itself is in the land. And so that's where I find that common ground. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your fine questions. Thank you, Robin, for your generosity in answering them. I want to bring us to a close so that we have a little bit of time before we all turn into pumpkins for Robin to sign books downstairs, which she has generously agreed to do. Thank you again, Dr. Kimmerer, for your words and your wisdom and the gift of your presence here with us today. Thank you so much. I'll close this evening's festivities by announcing the winner of the 2022 Thoreau Prize. This coming summer, we will award the prize to a writer who penned these words of Robin Wall Kimmerer. "It is the way she captures beauty that I love the most. The images of giant cedars and wild strawberries, a forest in the rain, and a meadow of fragrant sweetgrass. Those will stay with you long after you read the last page." Please watch the Thoreau Society website for the details of our honoring of Dr. Jane Goodall in the summer of 2022. When I told that news to Robin earlier today, she shouted out loud, "Yay!" And now to both our online and our in-person audience, thank you so much for coming, and thank you again, Dr. Kimmerer.
This is an amazing gift. Oh, goodness, that's so beautiful.
And then there's this is the envelope. Yes. Do you want me to? I'll take this. Okay, and I'll pack it up when I get down there.
Yep.
Is this your pen, Robin, or was that here?